Sergeant Major William Thompson adjusted his crisp uniform one final time before stepping through the automatic doors of Manchester Airport's departure terminal. The morning sun caught the gleaming medals adorning his chest, but none shone brighter than the bronze cross that held place of honor above all others. The Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military decoration for valor in the face of enemy action, had been pinned to his uniform by Queen Elizabeth herself just 2 years prior. At 62 years old, Thompson carried himself with the bearing that only comes from 3 decades of military service. His steel-gray hair was perfectly trimmed, his posture ramrod straight despite the weight of his service bag and the memories he carried. The deep lines around his eyes spoke of battles fought in distant lands, of comrades lost, and of a lifetime dedicated to crown and country. Thompson was traveling to Edinburgh for a ceremony honoring fallen soldiers from his regiment. As a recipient of the Victoria Cross for his actions during a Taliban ambush in Afghanistan, where he had single-handedly held off enemy forces to evacuate wounded civilians, he had been personally invited by military commanders to speak at the memorial service. The event meant everything to him, as it would honor the memory of young soldiers who had served under his command and paid the ultimate price for their service. He approached the check-in counter for Royal Air, a budget airline he had chosen to save money from his modest military pension. The young woman behind the counter, Sarah Mitchell, looked up from her computer screen with the practiced smile of someone who had processed thousands of passengers. Her name tag gleamed under the fluorescent lights and her uniform bore the company's logo prominently. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" Sarah asked, her fingers already hovering over the keyboard. "Good morning, miss. I have a booking to Edinburgh departing at 11:30, Thompson replied, producing his identification and printed boarding pass from his jacket pocket with military precision. Sarah took his documents and began typing, but her expression shifted as she noticed something on her screen. "I see you've requested priority boarding, Mr. Thompson. That will be an additional £45. Thompson's brow furrowed slightly. He had specifically chosen a fare that included priority boarding, understanding that his medals and military status often drew attention that could delay regular boarding procedures. "I believe priority boarding was included in my ticket purchase, miss. I selected the premium economy option specifically for that reason." Sarah shook her head, pointing at her computer screen. "No, sir. You purchased our basic fare. Priority boarding is an additional service that costs £45. If you'd like to add it, I can process that payment now." The confusion was evident on Thompson's weathered face. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his confirmation emails, double-checking his purchase. The booking clearly showed premium economy with included priority boarding, but he decided not to argue further. Military discipline had taught him to pick his battles, and this seemed like a minor administrative error. "Very well," he said quietly. "I suppose I can manage without priority boarding." But Sarah wasn't finished. Her eyes had finally focused on the impressive array of medals adorning Thompson's chest, and rather than showing respect or recognition, her expression turned skeptical. "Sir, are those medals real? Because we have policies about wearing costume jewelry and military impersonation." The question hit Thompson like a physical blow. In all his years of service, through countless flights in and out of military bases, civilian airports, and international terminals, no one had ever questioned the authenticity of his decorations. The Victoria Cross alone represented the highest honor his nation could bestow, earned through acts of extraordinary courage that had saved dozens of lives. "I assure you, miss, these medals are quite real," Thompson replied, his voice steady despite the shock he felt. "I served 30 years in Her Majesty's Armed Forces, and each of these decorations represents specific actions and years of service." Sarah's expression remained doubtful. "Well, anyone can buy military medals online these days. We've had problems with people trying to get special treatment by pretending to be war heroes. I'm going to need to see some additional verification." Thompson felt the eyes of other passengers beginning to turn toward the counter. A queue was forming behind him, and he could sense the growing impatience of travelers eager to complete their check-in process. The situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable, but his military training kept his voice controlled and respectful. "What sort of verification would you require, miss?" he asked. "Do you have any official military identification? Something that proves you actually served and earned these medals?" Sarah's tone had grown more challenging, as if she were certain she had caught someone in an elaborate deception. Thompson reached into his wallet and produced his military identification card, his veteran's card, and several other documents that clearly established his service record and decorations. He laid them carefully on the counter, ensuring Sarah could examine each one thoroughly. As Sarah scrutinized the documents, other passengers began to notice the growing tension at the check-in counter. Some recognized the distinctive ribbon and cross of the Victoria Cross, understanding immediately that they were witnessing something deeply inappropriate. Murmurs began to spread through the terminal as word passed from person to person that a decorated war hero was being questioned and treated with suspicion. Thompson maintained his composure, but inside he felt a deep sadness. This was not how he had imagined spending the morning before attending a ceremony to honor his fallen comrades. The young woman's skepticism and challenging attitude seemed to represent everything he feared about how modern society viewed military service and sacrifice. After several minutes of examining his credentials, Sarah finally looked up from the documents. Rather than apologizing for her suspicions, she simply handed them back with a dismissive gesture. These look legitimate, but company policy requires additional verification for passengers claiming military status for any kind of special treatment. I wasn't requesting special treatment, Thompson replied quietly. I simply wanted to confirm that the priority boarding I purchased was properly recorded. The situation continued to escalate as Sarah called over her supervisor, a harried-looking man in his 40s who seemed annoyed at being pulled away from other duties. The supervisor glanced briefly at Thompson's medals and documents before shrugging indifferently. Look, mate, the supervisor said, we get a lot of people trying to game the system with fake military stuff. Nothing personal, but we have to be careful. Thompson realized that this encounter was about to become something far more significant than a simple check-in procedure. The supervisor, David Collins, crossed his arms and looked Thompson up and down with obvious skepticism. His attitude made it clear that he considered this entire situation a waste of his valuable time. The name tag on his polyester uniform indicated his position as Terminal Operations Manager, giving him the authority to make decisions about passenger issues. Right then, Collins said loudly, drawing even more attention from nearby travelers. We're going to need to call security to verify these medals. Can't have people wandering around the airport impersonating military personnel. Thompson felt his chest tighten. The prospect of being subjected to a security investigation in full view of hundreds of passengers was mortifying. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, had led men through impossible situations, had been honored by royalty itself, yet here he stood being treated like a common criminal. Sir, I understand your concerns, Thompson said, maintaining his military bearing despite the circumstances. However, I have provided extensive documentation proving my service record and the authenticity of my decorations. Is there perhaps a manager who might be better equipped to handle this situation? Collins laughed harshly. I am the manager, mate, and I'm telling you that anyone can fake documents these days. Those medals could be replicas bought on eBay for all I know. By now, a crowd had gathered around the check-in counter. Among the observers was retired Air Force Group Captain James Morrison, who had been traveling with his wife to visit family in Scotland. Morrison recognized Thompson immediately, having served in joint operations in Afghanistan where Thompson's heroic actions had become legendary throughout British military circles. Morrison approached the counter, his own bearing marking him as a career military officer. Excuse me, he said firmly, addressing Collins. I believe there's been a misunderstanding here. This gentleman is Sergeant Major William Thompson, recipient of the Victoria Cross. I served with him in Afghanistan, and I can personally vouch for his authenticity. Collins turned his dismissive attitude toward Morrison. And you are? Group Captain James Morrison, Royal Air Force, retired, Morrison replied, producing his own military identification. This man is a genuine war hero who risked his life to save civilians under enemy fire. The way you're treating him is absolutely disgraceful. Look, I don't care if he's the Duke of Wellington, Collins snapped. Company policy is company policy. We don't give special treatment to anyone without proper verification through our security procedures. A young mother with her teenage son had been listening to the entire exchange. The boy, studying military history at school, had immediately recognized the significance of the Victoria Cross when he spotted it among Thompson's medals. Mum, he whispered urgently, that man has the Victoria Cross. Only a few people alive have ever earned that medal. His mother, Margaret Stevens, felt her anger rising as she watched the continued humiliation of the decorated veteran. She pulled out her phone and began recording the incident, ensuring that the world would see how Royal Air was treating a national hero. "This is absolutely shameful," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This man served our country with distinction, and you're treating him like a criminal." More passengers began voicing their support for Thompson and their outrage at the airline's treatment. The situation was rapidly spiraling beyond Collins's control, but rather than backing down, he doubled down on his aggressive stance. "Everyone needs to calm down and mind their own business," Collins announced. "This is a security matter, and we will handle it according to company procedures." Thompson, sensing the growing tension around him, attempted to defuse the situation. "Please, everyone, there's no need for upset. I'm sure this matter can be resolved quietly," but the crowd was having none of it. A businessman who had been waiting in line stepped forward, his face red with indignation. "This is exactly what's wrong with this country," he declared. "We don't respect the people who fought to keep us free." Collins, feeling cornered and embarrassed by the public criticism, made a decision that would soon prove to be catastrophic for both his career and his company's reputation. "Right, that's enough. I'm calling airport security to have this man removed until he can prove his military service through proper channels." The words hung in the air like a death sentence for Royal Air's public image. Thompson, a man who had faced Taliban fighters with calm determination, felt something he rarely experienced: genuine hurt. This wasn't about policy or procedures anymore. It had become a public humiliation of his service and sacrifice. Group Captain Morrison stepped closer to Collins, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet tone that military officers used when they were truly angry. "Young man, you are making a serious mistake. This gentleman is not just any veteran. He is one of the most decorated soldiers in modern British military history. The Victoria Cross is not handed out lightly, and the man wearing it deserves your respect, not your suspicion." Margaret Stevens continued filming, making sure to capture Collins' face clearly as he called for security. "The whole world is going to see this," she said. "How Royal Air treats war heroes will be on every social media platform within the hour." Other passengers began pulling out their phones as well, creating a circle of recording devices around the unfolding drama. The modern age of instant communication was about to turn a simple check-in dispute into a public relations nightmare that would reach the highest levels of government. Thompson stood at the center of it all, maintaining his dignity despite the circumstances. His mind drifted to the memorial service he was supposed to attend in Edinburgh, where he would speak about young soldiers who had died serving their country. The irony was not lost on him that while preparing to honor the dead, he was being dishonored by the living. Airport security personnel began making their way through the terminal toward the check-in area, their presence only adding to the tension and drawing even more attention to the situation. Thompson straightened his shoulders, preparing to face whatever came next with the same courage that had earned him Britain's highest military honor. The crowd around him continued to grow, and their anger toward Royal Air's treatment of the decorated veteran was becoming increasingly vocal. What had started as a simple check-in procedure was about to become a defining moment that would resonate far beyond the confines of Manchester Airport. Airport security arrived at the scene with the heavy footsteps and serious expressions that immediately quieted the surrounding crowd. 3 uniformed officers approached the check-in counter, led by Senior Security Officer Patricia Walsh, a 20-year veteran of airport operations who had handled everything from terror threats to celebrity incidents. Walsh surveyed the scene quickly, taking in Thompson's military bearing, his impressive array of medals, the angry crowd of passengers, and the increasingly defensive posture of the Royal Air staff. Her experienced eyes immediately recognized the gravity of the situation developing before her. "What seems to be the problem here?" Walsh asked, directing her question to Collins while keeping her voice professional and calm. Collins, now sweating visibly under the pressure of dozens of staring passengers, launched into his explanation. "This passenger is claiming to be some sort of war hero, but we need proper verification of his military status before we can process any special requests." Walsh's gaze moved to Thompson, and she immediately noticed the Victoria Cross among his decorations. As a former military police officer herself, She understood the significance of what she was seeing. The Victoria Cross was not just another medal. It was Britain's highest honor for valor, rarely awarded and never given lightly. "Sir," Walsh addressed Thompson respectfully, "may I ask what special requests you've made?" Thompson's voice remained steady and dignified. "I simply wanted to confirm that priority boarding was included in my ticket purchase." When questioned about it, the staff began expressing doubts about the authenticity of my military decorations. Walsh examined Thompson's tickets and documentation, her expression growing increasingly troubled as she realized what had transpired. She turned back to Collins with barely contained disapproval. "Mr. Collins, are you telling me that you questioned this gentleman's Victoria Cross?" "Company policy requires verification of any claims for special treatment," Collins replied defensively. Though his voice had lost much of its earlier confidence, the crowd erupted in angry murmurs at Collins' response. Margaret Stevens, still recording everything on her phone, spoke up loudly.
"He's not claiming anything."
"Those medals are real, and this man is a genuine war hero being treated like a criminal." Group Captain Morrison stepped forward again, his military ID in hand. "Officer Walsh, I can personally vouch for Sergeant Major Thompson's service record and decorations. We served together in Afghanistan, where his actions under fire saved dozens of lives." Walsh nodded grimly, understanding that she was witnessing a public relations disaster in the making. She had seen the videos that went viral when airlines mistreated passengers, and she knew the situation had all the ingredients for a massive scandal. "Mr. Collins," Walsh said firmly, "I need to speak with you privately, right now." As they stepped aside, Walsh's words were quiet but sharp enough that nearby passengers could still hear them. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "That man is wearing the Victoria Cross, the highest military decoration in the British honor system. There are probably fewer than 15 living recipients in the entire world." Collins's face began to pale as the full implications of his actions started to sink in. "But company policy says..." "Company policy doesn't override basic human decency and respect for military service," Walsh interrupted. "You've just publicly humiliated a national hero in front of hundreds of witnesses, all of whom are recording this on their phones." Meanwhile, the crowd around Thompson had grown to nearly 100 people, with passengers from throughout the terminal drawn by the commotion. Many had pulled out their phones and were already posting videos to social media platforms, adding captions like "Airline disrespects war hero" and "Victoria Cross winner humiliated at airport." Thompson remained composed throughout the ordeal, but those who looked closely could see the pain in his eyes. This wasn't just about poor customer service. It was about the respect and recognition that he had earned through 3 decades of military service and acts of extraordinary courage. An elderly gentleman in the crowd, identifying himself as a World War II veteran, made his way forward with the help of his walking stick. His voice shook with emotion as he addressed the crowd. "I fought in Burma 70 years ago, and I can tell you that what this airline is doing to this man is a disgrace to every person who ever wore the uniform." The sentiment was echoed throughout the crowd, with voices rising in support of Thompson and condemnation of Royal Air's treatment. The situation was no longer contained to a simple customer service dispute. It had become a symbol of how modern society treats its military veterans. Walsh returned to Thompson, her expression apologetic. "Sergeant Major, on behalf of airport security, I want to apologize for this situation. You have my word that you will be treated with the respect you deserve." Thompson nodded graciously. "Thank you, Officer Walsh. I appreciate your professionalism." But the damage had already been done. Videos of the incident were spreading across social media platforms at lightning speed. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok were flooded with footage of Thompson being questioned and humiliated, with hashtags like Royal Air Scandal and Respect Our Heroes trending within hours. News organizations began picking up the story from social media, recognizing the powerful human interest angle and the broader implications about how society treats its veterans. Local television stations dispatched crews to Manchester Airport, while national newspapers prepared front-page stories about the incident. Royal Air's corporate headquarters in London began receiving angry phone calls and emails from customers threatening to boycott the airline. The company's social media accounts were bombarded with complaints and demands for accountability. What had started as a minor customer service issue was rapidly evolving into a full-blown crisis that threatened the airline's reputation and bottom line. Thompson, unaware of the digital storm swirling around his treatment, simply wanted to catch his flight to Edinburgh for the memorial service. The ceremony meant everything to him, as it would honor young soldiers who had served under his command and made the ultimate sacrifice for their country. As Walsh worked to expedite Thompson's check-in process and ensure he could board his flight without further incident, the phones in Royal Air's executive offices were ringing non-stop with calls from journalists, government officials, and outraged members of the public demanding explanations and accountability. Within 2 hours of the incident at Manchester Airport, the story had exploded across every major news platform in the United Kingdom. The BBC's breaking news alert read, "Victoria Cross recipient humiliated by airline staff at Manchester Airport." Sky News interrupted regular programming to cover the developing story, while social media platforms crashed under the weight of shares, comments, and outraged responses from the public. At Clarence House, King Charles III's private secretary, Sir Edmund Harrington, burst into the King's private study where His Majesty was reviewing state papers. The ornate room, lined with centuries-old portraits of British monarchs, suddenly felt charged with urgent energy as Harrington approached the mahogany desk. "Your Majesty, we have a developing situation that requires your immediate attention," Harrington announced, his usually composed demeanor showing cracks of concern. King Charles looked up from his documents, noting the unusual urgency in his secretary's voice. "What's happened, Edmund?" Harrington placed his tablet on the desk, displaying the viral video that now had millions of views. A Victoria Cross recipient, Sergeant Major William Thompson, has been publicly humiliated by Royal Air staff at Manchester Airport. The entire incident was recorded and is spreading across social media at an unprecedented rate. The King's expression grew, increasingly grave as he watched the footage of Thompson being questioned and treated with suspicion. His jaw tightened as he witnessed the disrespect shown to a man who had risked everything in service to the crown. The Victoria Cross was not just a medal. It represented the highest ideals of courage, sacrifice, and dedication to duty that the monarchy itself embodied. "This is absolutely unacceptable," the King said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of royal authority. "Sergeant Major Thompson served with distinction in Afghanistan, did he not?" "Yes, Your Majesty. He received the Victoria Cross for extraordinary valor during a Taliban ambush in Helmand Province. His actions saved the lives of 17 civilians and 4 wounded soldiers, holding off enemy forces, single-handedly for over 3 hours until reinforcements arrived." King Charles had personally presented medals to countless servicemen and women throughout his years as Prince of Wales, and he remembered each recipient's story. Thompson's case was particularly memorable because of the extraordinary nature of his heroism and the humble way he had accepted the honor. "Get me the Prime Minister immediately," the King commanded, "and I want the CEO of Royal Air on the phone within the hour. This kind of treatment of our veterans is not just unacceptable. It's a disgrace to everything this nation stands for." Meanwhile, in Downing Street, Prime Minister's staff were dealing with their own crisis management situation. The phones hadn't stopped ringing since the story broke, with MPs from across the political spectrum demanding government action. Veterans organizations were calling for boycotts, and the opposition was preparing to use the incident as an example of how the government had failed to protect military personnel. At Royal Air's headquarters in central London, CEO Robert Matthews was in full panic mode. The company's stock price had already dropped 5% in early trading, as investors reacted to the negative publicity. Customer service lines were jammed with angry callers threatening to cancel bookings, and the airline's social media accounts had become battlegrounds of public outrage. Matthews gathered his senior management team in the boardroom, where large screens displayed the cascading social media disaster in real time. Marketing Director Sarah Johnson pulled up analytics showing the viral spread of the video across platforms. "Sir, we're looking at over 15 million views across all platforms in less than 3 hours," Johnson reported, her voice shaking. "The engagement is overwhelmingly negative, with calls for boycotts trending in multiple countries." "How did this happen?" Matthews demanded, loosening his tie as sweat beaded on his forehead. "How did our staff not recognize a Victoria Cross recipient?" Head of Operations Michael Chen pulled up personnel files on his laptop. The staff involved claim they were following company policy regarding verification of military status. They say they had no training on recognizing military decorations. No training? Matthews exploded. We're a British airline and our staff don't know what a Victoria Cross looks like? This is an absolute catastrophe. Legal Director Amanda Foster raised another concern that made everyone's blood run cold. Sir, we're already receiving calls from Sergeant Major Thompson's representatives about potential legal action. Beyond that, the palace has been calling our offices for the past hour. I believe we can expect royal intervention in this matter. Back at Manchester Airport, Thompson had finally boarded his flight to Edinburgh, but not before being approached by dozens of fellow passengers offering their support and apologies for how he had been treated. The airline crew on his flight, having heard about the incident, went out of their way to ensure his comfort and dignity were respected. Flight attendant Emma Roberts approached Thompson's seat personally. Sergeant Major Thompson, on behalf of Royal Air, I want to express my deepest apologies for what happened during check-in. Your service to our country deserves nothing but respect and gratitude. Thompson, ever gracious despite his ordeal, smiled warmly. Thank you, miss. I appreciate your kindness. These things happen and I bear no ill will toward anyone. But Thompson's forgiving nature wouldn't be enough to stem the tide of public outrage that continued building throughout the day. Veterans organizations across the Commonwealth issued statements condemning Royal Air's treatment of the decorated hero. The Royal British Legion, Help for Heroes, and Combat Stress all called for immediate action and accountability. General Sir Patrick Williams, Chief of the General Staff, released a statement that sent shockwaves through the military and civilian communities alike. The treatment of Sergeant Major Thompson represents a fundamental failure to understand the sacrifices made by our service personnel. The Victoria Cross is not just a piece of metal. It represents the highest ideals of courage and service to the Crown. To question its authenticity is to question the very foundation of military honor. International media picked up the story as well, with CNN, Fox News, and major European outlets covering the incident as an example of how veterans are treated in modern society. Military blogs and forums exploded with anger and solidarity for Thompson, while airline industry publications began analyzing the potential long-term impact on Royal Air's reputation and business. As Thompson's flight took off for Edinburgh, he remained unaware of the massive storm his quiet dignity had unleashed across the United Kingdom and beyond. His focus remained on the memorial service he would attend, where he would honor the memories of young soldiers who had paid the ultimate price for their service. Little did he know that within hours, the most powerful person in the realm would personally intervene on his behalf, setting in motion a response that would change not just his life, but the way airlines across the world would treat military veterans forever. The red phone on King Charles III's desk rang precisely at 3:47 p.m., connecting him directly to Prime Minister David Harrison at Downing Street. The secure line crackled slightly as the two men prepared to discuss what had rapidly become a matter of national importance. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister began, his voice carrying the weight of genuine concern, I've been briefed on the situation involving Sergeant Major Thompson. This is absolutely unacceptable treatment of one of our most decorated veterans. King Charles's response was measured but firm, each word carrying the full authority of the Crown. Prime Minister, this incident represents far more than poor customer service. It strikes at the very heart of how we honor those who have served with distinction. The Victoria Cross is the highest decoration I can bestow, and to see its recipient treated with such disrespect is personally offensive to me, as sovereign. I completely agree, Your Majesty. My office has been inundated with calls from MPs across all parties demanding action. The public outrage is unprecedented and rightfully so. The King leaned back in his leather chair, his mind already formulating a response that would send a clear message about the value placed on military service. I want to invite Sergeant Major Thompson to Buckingham Palace for a private audience. The nation needs to see that his service and sacrifice are valued at the highest levels of government. That would send a powerful message, Your Majesty. I'd also like to propose a review of how veterans are treated by service industries across the country. Perhaps it's time for formal recognition standards that all British companies should follow. As the two leaders discussed their response, Royal Air CEO Robert Matthews was experiencing the worst day of his professional career. The company's share price had plummeted 12% by market close, wiping nearly £50 million off the airline's valuation. Booking cancellations were pouring in faster than the customer service department could process them. Matthews sat in his office, surrounded by crisis management consultants, legal advisors, and public relations specialists, all trying to salvage what remained of the company's reputation. The wall-mounted television displayed continuous coverage of the incident, with military experts and social commentators dissecting every aspect of Thompson's treatment. "Sir," his communications director announced grimly, "we've just received word that Buckingham Palace has requested an immediate meeting with you. They want you in London tonight." Matthews felt his stomach drop. A summons from the palace was unprecedented in his 20-year career in aviation. "Do we know what they want to discuss?" "I think we can safely assume it's about Sergeant Major Thompson, sir." Meanwhile, in Edinburgh, Thompson had successfully attended the memorial service that meant so much to him. The ceremony at the Scottish National War Memorial was deeply moving, as he spoke about young soldiers who had served under his command in Afghanistan. His words about sacrifice, duty, and remembrance brought tears to the eyes of hundreds of attendees. After the service, Thompson was approached by Lieutenant Colonel James MacDonald, the event's organizer. MacDonald looked troubled as he showed Thompson his smartphone. "Sergeant Major, I think you need to see this." The incident at Manchester Airport has become international news. Thompson stared in shock at the millions of views, thousands of comments, and widespread media coverage his airport ordeal had generated. Social media was flooded with messages of support from people around the world, including veterans from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States sharing their own stories of disrespect and calling for better treatment of military personnel. "I never intended for this to become such a public matter," Thompson said quietly. "I simply wanted to catch my flight and honor our fallen comrades." "Sometimes, Sergeant Major, these incidents serve a greater purpose. Your dignity in the face of disrespect has highlighted an important issue that needed attention." Back in London, the palace was coordinating an unprecedented response to the airline incident. Private Secretary Sir Edmund Harrington was working with the King's communications team to craft a statement that would be both supportive of Thompson and clearly critical of the airline's conduct. The statement, released at 6 p.m. on official palace letterhead, read, "His Majesty the King has been made aware of the disgraceful treatment received by Victoria Cross, recipient Sergeant Major William Thompson at Manchester Airport. The King wishes to express his complete support for Sergeant Major Thompson and his disapproval of the disrespect shown to a decorated veteran who has served with extraordinary distinction. His Majesty looks forward to welcoming Sergeant Major Thompson to Buckingham Palace to personally thank him for his continued service to the Crown and the nation." The royal statement sent shockwaves through the media and political establishment. It was highly unusual for the monarch to intervene so directly in a commercial dispute. But the symbolic importance of defending the Victoria Cross and its recipients transcended normal royal protocol. Within minutes of the palace statement's release, Royal Air's stock price dropped another 8% in after-hours trading. International aviation industry publications began speculating about the long-term viability of an airline that had publicly humiliated a war hero and subsequently faced royal condemnation. At Royal Air headquarters, Matthews received the royal summons with growing dread. His legal team advised him that the company faced potential lawsuits not just from Thompson, but from investors who had lost money due to the incident's impact on share prices. "Sir," his crisis management consultant said grimly, "we're looking at a complete brand rehabilitation challenge. The palace statement has effectively put royal disapproval on public record. We need to consider whether the company can survive this level of reputational damage." Matthews began drafting his resignation letter, knowing that his career in aviation was likely over. The board of directors had called an emergency meeting for the following morning, and Matthews knew they would demand accountability for the disaster that had engulfed the company. As night fell over London, King Charles sat in his private study, reviewing plans for Thompson's visit to Buckingham Palace. The king had decided that this would not be a simple meeting, but a full ceremonial occasion that would publicly demonstrate the Crown's respect for military service and its recipients. The message was clear. Those who served the Crown with distinction would always have the protection and support of the monarchy, and any organization that failed to recognize this would face the full weight of royal displeasure. Thompson, still in Edinburgh and largely unaware of the royal intervention on his behalf, was about to become the center of a story that would reshape how airlines and other service industries treated military veterans around the world. The following morning brought devastating news for Royal Air, as the company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting at their London headquarters. Chairman Sir Michael Pemberton arrived to find protesters gathered outside the building, carrying signs reading "Respect Our Heroes" and "Royal Air Non-Royal Disgrace." The crowd had grown throughout the night as veterans organizations coordinated demonstrations at Royal Air offices across the country. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was funeral-like as board members reviewed the financial carnage from the previous 24 hours. The airline's stock had lost over 20% of its value, booking cancellations were approaching 50,000, and major corporate clients were threatening to terminate their travel contracts. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sir Michael began grimly, "we are facing an existential crisis. The Palace statement has essentially made us persona non grata with the establishment, and public sentiment has turned completely against us." Chief Financial Officer Patricia Williams presented the devastating financial projections. "If current trends continue, we're looking at losses exceeding £100 million in the first quarter alone. Several major investors have already indicated they're considering divesting their holdings. At Manchester Airport, the situation for Royal Air staff had become increasingly difficult. Check-in agents reported being confronted by angry passengers throughout the day, with many travelers specifically changing their bookings to avoid flying with the airline. Airport security had to escort several Royal Air employees to their cars after their shifts due to ongoing protests. Sarah Mitchell, the check-in agent who had first questioned Thompson's medals, had been suspended pending a full investigation. She sat in her small flat, watching news coverage of the incident that had destroyed her career and possibly her future in the aviation industry. The young woman who had simply been following what she thought was company policy now found herself at the center of a national scandal. Meanwhile, Thompson received a phone call that would change everything. Sir Edmund Harrington's voice was warm and respectful as he delivered the King's invitation. "Sergeant Major Thompson, His Majesty. The King would be honored to welcome you to Buckingham Palace at your earliest convenience. The King wishes to personally express his gratitude for your service and to discuss the unfortunate incident you experienced." Thompson was speechless for several moments. In all his years of military service, he had never imagined receiving a personal invitation from the monarch. "Sir, I would be deeply honored to accept His Majesty's invitation. When would be convenient? Would tomorrow afternoon be suitable, Sergeant Major? His Majesty is most eager to meet with you, and frankly, the nation needs to see that your service is properly valued." As news of the royal invitation spread through media channels, the story took on even greater significance. Constitutional experts noted that it was highly unusual for the monarch to intervene so directly in what had begun as a commercial dispute, but they emphasized that the Victoria Cross represented the Crown's highest recognition of valor, making Thompson's mistreatment a matter of royal concern. At Royal Air headquarters, CEO Robert Matthews faced the inevitable. The board had voted unanimously to demand his immediate resignation, along with that of terminal operations. Manager David Collins and several other executives involved in the company's response to the incident. Matthews stood before news cameras outside the company's headquarters, reading a prepared statement with obvious difficulty. "I take full responsibility for the unacceptable treatment received by Sergeant Major Thompson. Royal Air failed to live up to the standards of respect and gratitude that our military veterans deserve. Effective immediately, I am resigning as Chief Executive Officer." The resignation did little to stem the continued hemorrhaging of the company's reputation and finances. Major travel agencies began dropping Royal Air from their preferred airlines lists, while competitor airlines launched advertising campaigns specifically highlighting their respect for military personnel. Virgin Atlantic released a statement within hours. "At Virgin Atlantic, we recognize that our freedom to fly comes from the sacrifices of our military personnel. We are proud to offer priority services and special recognition to all veterans and active service members." British Airways followed with their own announcement. "The brave men and women who serve our nation deserve our highest respect and gratitude. We are committed to ensuring that military personnel receive the honor they have earned through their service." The contrast with Royal Air's treatment of Thompson couldn't have been starker, and public sentiment rallied behind airlines that demonstrated genuine appreciation for military service. That evening, Thompson sat in his modest Edinburgh hotel room, still struggling to process how a simple flight to attend a memorial service had sparked a national conversation about respect for veterans. His phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from journalists, veterans organizations, and well-wishers from around the world. Lieutenant Colonel MacDonald visited Thompson to help him prepare for the royal audience. "Sergeant Major, what you've endured has highlighted an important issue that affects veterans across the country. Your dignified response in the face of disrespect has become a symbol of military bearing and professionalism." Thompson shook his head slowly. "I never wanted to become a symbol of anything, Colonel. I just wanted to honor our fallen comrades and catch my flight home. Sometimes, Sergeant Major, we don't choose when we're called to serve. Your service didn't end when you left Afghanistan. It continues every time you demonstrate the values that make our military great." Back in London, preparations were underway at Buckingham Palace for Thompson's visit. The king had decided this would not be a simple private meeting, but a formal audience that would be covered by media, sending a clear message about the monarchy's support for military veterans. Palace staff worked through the night preparing the throne room for the ceremonial audience. The king's intention was to create a moment that would not only honor Thompson personally, but also establish a clear precedent about how the crown expected its decorated veterans to be treated. Royal protocol officers briefed the media on the significance of the upcoming audience, emphasizing that it represented the king's personal commitment to honoring military service and his disapproval of Thompson's treatment by royal heir. As dawn broke over London, the stage was set for a royal intervention that would not only vindicate Thompson but potentially change how veterans were treated by service industries across the Commonwealth. The king's response would demonstrate that attacks on military honor would not be tolerated, and that the crown would always stand with those who had served with distinction. Thompson prepared for a day that would take him from a simple check-in dispute to the throne room of Buckingham Palace, where the sovereign himself would publicly demonstrate the respect and gratitude that should have been shown from the very beginning. The gates of Buckingham Palace opened at precisely 2 p.m. as the royal limousine carrying Sergeant Major William Thompson glided through the courtyard. Hundreds of media representatives lined the mall, their cameras capturing every moment of what had become one of the most watched royal audiences in recent memory. The world was witnessing something unprecedented, a monarch publicly defending a veteran who had been disrespected by a commercial airline. Thompson, wearing his full-dress uniform with every metal polished to perfection, maintained his military bearing despite the extraordinary circumstances. The Victoria Cross, gleaming prominently among his decorations, seemed to catch every ray of sunlight as he stepped from the vehicle. Palace guards saluted as he passed, a gesture of respect from one military professional to another. Inside the throne room, King Charles III waited in full ceremonial dress, the weight of centuries of royal tradition evident in every detail of the magnificent chamber. The ornate throne, portraits of previous monarchs, and elaborate decorations created an atmosphere that spoke to the continuity of British history and the crown's role as protector of national values. "Your Majesty," Thompson said as he entered, offering a perfect military bow that demonstrated a lifetime of service to the crown. "Sergeant Major Thompson," the king replied warmly, stepping forward to shake his hand. "It is my honor to welcome you to Buckingham Palace. Your service to this nation and the courage you demonstrated in Afghanistan represent the finest traditions of British military excellence." The king's words were carefully chosen, not just for Thompson but for the cameras recording the historic moment. Every syllable would be analyzed by constitutional experts, military historians, and public relations professionals around the world. "Your Majesty is too kind," Thompson replied with characteristic humility. "I simply did my duty, as any soldier would have done." "What happened to you at Manchester Airport was not just an insult to you personally, but to every man and woman who has served in our armed forces," the king continued, his voice carrying unmistakable authority. "The Victoria Cross represents the highest ideals of courage and sacrifice. To question its authenticity is to question the very foundation of military honor." Outside the palace, crowds had gathered throughout the morning, holding signs supporting Thompson and denouncing royal heir's treatment of veterans. The demonstration had grown to include veterans from multiple conflicts, their families, and ordinary citizens who felt compelled to show their support for military personnel. Margaret Stevens, the mother who had filmed the original incident at Manchester Airport, stood among the crowd with her teenage son. "I never imagined that video would lead to this," she said to reporters. "But I'm glad the world saw how wrong it was to treat a war hero that way." The royal audience continued for nearly an hour, with the king personally thanking Thompson for his service and discussing the broader issues facing veterans in modern society. Their conversation touched on the need for better recognition of military service and the importance of ensuring that those who had sacrificed for their country received appropriate respect. "Sergeant Major," the king said as their meeting concluded, "I want you to know that this incident has highlighted an important issue that requires ongoing attention. Your dignity in the face of disrespect has served your country once again by bringing this matter to national prominence." As Thompson prepared to leave, the king made an announcement that surprised even palace staff. "I am establishing a new royal charter for veteran recognition that will set standards for how military personnel should be treated by all British companies operating under royal warrant. This charter will ensure that what happened to you never happens to another veteran." The announcement sent shockwaves through the business community. Royal warrants were highly coveted symbols of excellence, and the threat of losing them over poor treatment of veterans would force companies across the country to reassess their policies and training. Meanwhile, Royal Air was experiencing its final death throes as a company. The resignation of the CEO and senior management had failed to restore public confidence, and booking cancellations had reached catastrophic levels. Major shareholders were demanding the immediate sale of company assets before the brand became completely worthless. Emergency. Board meetings continued around the clock as directors desperately sought buyers for the airline's routes, aircraft, and remaining assets. Several international carriers expressed interest in acquiring Royal Air's physical assets, but none wanted anything to do with the toxic brand name that had become synonymous with disrespecting veterans. Sarah Mitchell, the check-in agent who had started the entire controversy, watched the royal audience coverage from her small flat. The young woman had received death threats, lost her job, and found herself unemployable in the aviation industry. Her social media accounts had been bombarded with angry messages from people around the world who blamed her for the entire incident. In a moment of desperation, Mitchell recorded a video apology that she posted on social media. Tears streaming down her face, she addressed Thompson directly. "Sergeant Major Thompson, I am deeply sorry for questioning your service and your medals. I was following what I thought was company policy, but I realize now how wrong and hurtful my actions were. You deserved respect and gratitude, not suspicion and disrespect." The video apology went viral within hours, generating millions of views and thousands of comments. While some people showed sympathy for Mitchell's youth and inexperience, others maintained that ignorance was no excuse for disrespecting a war hero. Thompson, demonstrating the grace that had characterized his response throughout the entire ordeal, issued a statement through the palace. "I bear no personal animosity toward the individuals involved in this incident. This was a failure of training and corporate culture, not individual malice. I hope this situation serves as a learning experience for everyone involved." As the sun set over London, the impact of the King's intervention was already being felt across the country. Airlines, hotels, restaurants, and service companies began implementing new policies specifically designed to recognize and honor military personnel. The Royal Charter announcement had created a powerful incentive for businesses to demonstrate genuine respect for veterans. Within 6 months, Royal Air had ceased operations entirely, with its assets sold to competitors and its brand name retired forever. The company that had once carried millions of passengers became a cautionary tale about the importance of respecting those who serve their country. Thompson returned to his quiet retirement, but his experience had sparked a national conversation about veteran recognition that led to lasting changes in how military personnel were treated across British society. The Victoria Cross recipient who had simply wanted to attend a memorial service had become an unwitting catalyst for social change. The King's swift and decisive response had sent a clear message that would resonate for generations. Those who serve the crown with distinction will always have the protection and support of the monarchy, and any organization that fails to recognize this will face the full consequences of royal displeasure. The incident became a defining moment in the relationship between the military, the monarchy, and civilian society, establishing precedents that would protect veterans for decades to come, while demonstrating that true leadership means standing up for principles even when it requires dramatic action.